Chapter 1883, Settling the Storm. Fatty Sue said to Zhang Yi, "My current state is truly wondrous. I feel that." He looked down at his palm and clenched his fingers twice. "I have already been able to merge with this world of ice and snow." Zhang Yi laughed sarcastically. "You are the slowest among us to break through. The spirit of sacrifice is extremely precious, you must make good use of it." He looked at Zhou Qir and said, "You see, even Qir broke through 3 days earlier than you." Fatty Sue lowered his head in embarrassment. But I've also worked really hard. I feel super strong right now. Brother, you have to believe in me." Zhang Yi gave a faint smile and didn't particularly take this matter to heart. Zhou Qir gathered her hair and smiled gently at Zhang Yi. "Although you said that this battle is only about honor, not life and death. However, the help of those around you is also part of your strength. Let me do your physical modifications for you." Zhang Yi nodded with a smile. "Sure, let's do it." Fatty Sue came over to flatter him. "Big brother, with your current strength, no one in the human world can beat you, right? You are being too careful." Zhang Yi narrowed his eyes and reminded him, "Don't underestimate anyone." The Knights of the Round Table were able to clear the world of the underground civilization as a team with just a dozen people. No one can say how strong they are. And remember, the world has changed. While you were getting stronger, others weren't sitting around either. Li Changgong is a case in point. Never underestimate anyone. Otherwise, it could be fatal. Fatty Sue scratched his head and said apologetically, "I know, you're awesome." Zhou Qir came up behind Zhang Yi and then extended her own snow-white, soft hands. Her palms were so beautiful, white and slender, as if Michelangelo had carved them with a carving knife, without a single flaw. Perhaps the only thing that could compare to her perfect hands were her feet. That was the benefit of her abilities, making her as flawless as white jade. According to Yang Xia, it was an ability that would make all women in the world jealous. She placed her soft, warm hands like soft mutton fat on Zhang Yi's temples. A bright white light condensed in the palms of her hands, and then poured into Zhang Yi's body like a trickle. At this time, the warships of Britannia had also arrived off the coast of Tianhai City, less than 100 nautical miles from Chongguan Island. King Arthur sat cross-legged on the deck, next to his ancestral and luxurious knight's two-handed sword, with red and blue sapphires inlaid on it that would have been priceless before the end of the world. He closed his eyes and breathed steadily. The members of the Knights of the Round Table, standing or leaning against the railing behind him, were also here today to watch and provide protection. There was an unspoken agreement that the duel between the two of them was only about honor, not about life and death. But no one dared to guarantee the life of the strongest mutant in the country. At 9 o'clock in the morning, King Arthur slowly opened his eyes because he received a message from Zhang Yi. The battlefield will be a 100-mile radius centered on Chongguan Island. No advance preparations are allowed, including traps, material preparations, etc. At 10 o'clock, I will enter the battlefield from the north, and you from the south. The battle will continue until one side concedes defeat. We will fight to the point of no return, but no one will be killed." King Arthur raised the corners of his mouth. "That sounds fair. I have no objections. I also hope that you will abide by these rules." Zhang Yi is a sniper, which many people always tend to forget. He is very good at ultra-long-range sniping, so expanding the battlefield gives him room to show off his abilities. So this rule is also very fair, and King Arthur naturally has no objection. A radius of 100 kilometers and a diameter of 200 kilometers. There will not be many opportunities for Zhang Yi to make his move. King Arthur is fighting with Zhang Yi in full form for the first time and also wants to try how strong his sniping ability is. After the two agreed, Merlin said behind them, "We'll be at the edge of the battlefield to prevent them from cheating. If you notice anything amiss, notify us immediately." The members of the Knights of the Round Table behind them all had proud expressions on their faces. Although there were only a dozen of them, they could rule the world. They were the world's only mutant force to have independently cleared a copy of an underground civilization. The team was full of powerful people. You must remember that the 6 people Zhang Yi encountered in the southwest region were among the less powerful of the 12. The most powerful mutants at the time had already left with King Arthur and Merlin to go to Atlantis for the first time. King Arthur gave a faint smile. The news of our duel has been spread through various channels. I believe Chaos will not do anything despicable. Merlin said with a smile, "Oh? Is that so? But I've heard that his reputation has always been bad, and he often does despicable things." King Arthur shook his head and said frankly, "In a life-and-death battle, strategy is also part of strength, and there is no room for doubt. In a gentleman's battle, I believe you will not play tricks." Merlin shrugged, "That's for the best." Time passed by minute, and Zhang Yi also led his men closer to the outer perimeter of the decisive battle area. They were on the Golden Front, and Liu Karen persuaded Zhang Yi to bring the city defense sniper with them. The advantage of a 200-kilometer head start is enough to make the opponent suffer if you use the city defense sniper. Zhang Yi gave a faint smile and shook his head to reject the proposal. "To be honest, right now I also want to see what level my strength is at." He clenched his fists, but a serious look flashed in his eyes. This battle is not a matter of life and death, so he doesn't have much of a burden. Since it is not easy to come across such an opportunity, wouldn't it be a waste not to test the improvement in his strength over this period of time? He also wants to try and find out just what level he has reached after being bathed in the spiritual essence of the Yihen tribe sea. Yang Xinxin said, "We will be here. Once we notice that something is amiss, we will intervene in the battlefield as soon as possible." Zhang Yi raised his right hand and made a skilled gesture, lightly touching his brows with his 2 fingers and waving his hand towards them. This is to tell them to just relax. The 2 sides set their watches, and as soon as the time was up, they immediately entered the battlefield. Zhang Yi raised his hand, and on his right hand was a black bracelet. It seemed to have a life of its own, extending out countless black vines, which then twisted and wound, eventually turning into a huge black sniper rifle in Zhang Yi's hand. "In fact, I can snipe up to 200 kilometers away without the city defense sniper right now. Zhang Yi doesn't need to aim. The predictive ability of the second hand of time has reached 4 seconds. He knows where King Arthur will be in 4 seconds. This huge sniper rifle is called a gun, but after Liu Karen's modifications, its performance and strength are comparable to a super cannon. With the added boost of supernatural power, its range and power are extremely impressive. Zhang Yi can destroy an aircraft carrier with just 1 shot. Zhang Yi has already loaded the nuclear bullet and raised the big gun to aim at the front. King Arthur entered the battlefield and charged forward like a storm. His body moved like a swimming dragon, advancing in an irregular manner, sending the surface of the sea surging and surging. This is indeed a good way to avoid being sniped, but unfortunately Zhang Yi doesn't aim at all, he locks onto King Arthur's future. Zhang Yi pulled the trigger with all his strength, and the Divine Refinement sniper rifle let out a deafening roar. A black beam of light shot through the space above the ocean, carrying the nuclear bullet straight into the distance. The attack came fast, from 200 kilometers away, and King Arthur caught sight of its trajectory in an instant. He deftly dodged in midair. However, as he did so, the bullet, which had been several tens of meters away, exploded with a deafening boom. The power of the nuclear bullet spread out, instantly boiling the sea water and sending the waves skyward. The force sent King Arthur flying far, far back. His progress was suddenly stopped, and his body came to a standstill in midair. Zhang Yi had already replaced the second bullet and continued to take aim. What a fearsome sniper! This power is not that of an ordinary bullet, it's practically a missile. A nuclear bullet? It's terrifying. King Arthur raised the corners of his mouth, but immediately continued on a curved path towards Zhang Yi. Immediately afterwards, the second bullet came flying towards him. King Arthur was already prepared, holding his sword in one hand, unsheathed, and just like playing golf, he caught the bullet with pinpoint accuracy, then forcefully launched it into the distance. Boom! The distant sea once again boiled. Feeling King Arthur approaching, Zhang Yi was in no hurry at all. He opened the dimensional gate and was ready to pull away at any time. Then he continued shooting. For the third bullet, King Arthur felt a hint of difficulty when he tried to make it ricochet. The closer the distance, the shorter the time he had to react. At this point, he had already arrived at Chongwon Island, which meant that the distance between the two of them was only 100 nautical miles. For the fourth bullet, King Arthur finally began to draw his sword. Excalibur. I came, I saw, I conquered. The sword, a symbol of kingship, was drawn from its sheath. A single slash, a flash of light, and the bullet was cleaved in half. Zhang Yi was in no hurry and continued to shoot in silence. He had never expected to take King Arthur down with a distance advantage. Consume, and then wait for the moment. By the seventh bullet, the distance between the two had become even closer, only 10 nautical miles. This distance was as close as could be for the two. Zhang Yi calmly loaded the bullet, then raised his gun and pulled the trigger. Bang! The deafening sound of the gunshot echoed across the sea. The bishop-level sniper, combined with the top-level sniper rifle, was loud enough to make people's livers and guts tremble. King Arthur had already adapted to the power of the bullet, so at this time he no longer had any concerns. Facing the black light, he raised his hand and slashed. The black light was split in response. But at the same time, from the side of his body, another black light full of destructive power also shot at his temple. King Arthur's face showed a look of dismay. He remembered that he had clearly slashed the bullet in half. Destined reincarnation. A very tricky technique that uses the dimensional gate to redirect the bullet while it is flying through the air. This is one of Zhang Yi's sniper kills, and although it sounds simple, if you don't know about this method of use in advance, you will definitely be taken by surprise the first time you face it. Countless powerful opponents have been killed by bullets that can turn corners due to negligence. At the last minute, King Arthur raised the scabbard of his left hand and placed it by his side. A transparent barrier appeared around him. The bearer of the scabbard of the king's sword would not bleed. Not only was his sword a weapon, but so was the scabbard. Bang! The black beam slammed against the barrier, sending black particles scattering like sparks, but ultimately failing to break through the defense. Oh! Interesting, although it did not directly kill King Arthur, it at least tested some of his secrets. The sword sheath is a defensive measure, and it has been obtained. It's time to change the bullets for the shield-piercing spear, Zhang Yi said indifferently, while skillfully changing the bullets. King Arthur was only 5 kilometers away from Zhang Yi. This distance was enough for his sword to kill Zhang Yi. That's enough. I can't let you keep shooting at me forever, King Arthur laughed. He raised his sword in his hand and slashed at Zhang Yi with a single stroke. Simple and unadorned, the sword's blade burst forth with dazzling light, like the evening sky filled with stars, cutting through space. Excalibur. The sword sheath represents the protection of the land, while the sword represents the conquest of all. Around Zhang Yi, a series of dimensional gates rapidly began to expand. Everything under heaven. The sword's blade slashed at the dimensional gate, quickly dissipating without a trace. And at this moment, King Arthur took out a green conch horn from his waist. He placed the horn to his mouth and blew hard. The sound of the horn came melodiously, and ripples began to vibrate in all directions along with the space. As the sound waves spread, the previously undulating sea surface was like a piece of crumpled white paper that had suddenly been ironed out by someone with an iron, so flat that there was not a single ripple. Zhang Yi also noticed that his dimensional gate had actually begun to fluctuate under these strange fluctuations. Then, like layers of bubbles surrounding Zhang Yi, they quickly dissipated. Zhang Yi's greatest support, his space ability, the dimensional gate, was directly lifted by King Arthur. The sea beneath his feet had also become as flat and transparent as a mirror, like a blue mirror. The sight was beautiful, like a dream. It was only at this time that Zhang Yi realized what had happened. He was shocked as he felt the space around him. After the dimensional gate was defeated, it would not be possible to summon it again for a short period of time. Right now, he felt like a naked baby, exposed to the enemy. King Arthur held a conch shell in his hand, and the two looked at each other across the distance, with the mirror-like sea below them. He smiled and waved the conch shell in his hand. I took this from a fisherman in Atlantis. It can calm the waves of the sea, and it can also restrict fluctuations in any space. I've prepared thoroughly for you. What do you say, Chaos? Are you going to admit defeat now? Both sides watching from a distance through special equipment could clearly see this scene. Merlin narrowed his eyes. Luckily, I have fought Chaos before, so I know his abilities very well. Otherwise, he rubbed his neck, that kind of perverted defensive method really wouldn't work. Lancelot, who was holding his sword in his arms, said with a cold smile, the mutant with attributes of time and space has now been completely stripped of his space attribute. Does this battle still need to continue? A mutant master fights for every move, and the more powerful the mutant, the more one cannot afford to be careless. Any simple oversight can lead to defeat in a duel. What's more, Zhang Yi's abilities have now been completely restrained. On Zhang Yi's team, Fatty Su's face turned pale. Oh, no! How could he have such a perverted thing? This is downright cheating. Yang Xinxin, however, said calmly, no, it's a strategy to make preparations based on known information. Could it be that my brother has lost? That's impossible. Lu Karen clenched her fists, finding it hard to accept the truth in front of her. Uncle, you frowned, but, from the look on Zhang Yi's face, it doesn't seem like he's going to lose. Lu Karen and the others heard this and looked at the expression on Zhang Yi's face in the image. Although there was some shock at first, they quickly regained their composure. Of course. Yang Xinxin's face showed no expression, because she was confident in Zhang Yi. They don't understand what's happened to my brother. Only she knew. After being bathed in 14.8 billion copies of the Yihen tribe's spiritual essence, what kind of changes had taken place in their bodies? The shock on Zhang Yi's face only lasted for an instant, and he marveled at the power of this special prop. No wonder you're King Arthur, you really are something. This is what makes it interesting, you haven't disappointed me, Zhang Yi said to King Arthur. King Arthur sensed something unusual, because Zhang Yi's performance was really too calm. It was so calm that it didn't seem like something a mutant whose powers had been broken should be doing. You. Zhang Yi raised the divine refinement in his hand. In the blink of an eye, the divine refinement also underwent extremely strange changes. With the Green Knight Bowser as its original form and constantly being transformed according to its special supernatural attributes, this weapon possessed immeasurable potential. And there was one more thing that many people had overlooked. The ones who had received the baptism of 14.8 billion spirit essences were 3.5 people. The remaining half is the divine refinement. A black glow rose from the body of the divine refinement, and after a moment, both Zhang Yi and the divine refinement underwent terrible changes. The divine refinement transformed into a huge black battlesword over 2 meters long, with a broad body and a bloody groove on the blade. Almost becoming one with it was the dark black armor on Zhang Yi's body. It is dark and lightless, and does not even reflect light, so it looks as dark as a black hole. The joints of the armor are sharp and angular, and the helmet on his head has also become similar to the helmet of the Knight of the Rabid Dog. Seeing Zhang Yi in his current form, everyone was shocked, their eyes wide, unable to believe what they were seeing. Because Zhang Yi's appearance at this time was almost no different from the 10 demon gods of mechanical civilization. In particular, King Arthur, who had entered the world through the Gate of Light, felt an extremely familiar feeling when he saw Zhang Yi's appearance and the dark battlesword in his hands. For some reason, in his mind, the image of Zhang Yi and the king of mechanical civilization, the six-winged sovereign, gradually merged into one. His feeling was not wrong. This brand new set of armor was created by directly transforming the mechanical parts of Ichigard. As for the new divine refinement in Zhang Yi's hands, it also incorporates Ichigard's Sword of Kings. This armor is not at all on the same level as the previous submarine dragon armor. Because the armor is equivalent to a brand new operating system, it is embedded with a weapon system of mechanical civilization. What is this concept? It is comparable to a bishop-level mutant. King Arthur looked at Zhang Yi in disbelief. Do you mean to say that you have already cracked the technology of the 10 demon gods? They also obtained the remains of the demon gods, but so far they have not been able to research much. However, Zhang Yi has already applied it to the battle armor. Zhang Yi raised the black battlesword in his hand and pointed it directly at King Arthur. Try out my new equipment. He pulled his right hand back as if drawing a bow, gathering power. The powerful power of the void, or rather, the antimatter energy drawn from the mirror surface of the world, gathered on the blade like a tidal wave. From a distance, Zhang Yi slashed down with all his might. The sky and the sea were like two smooth mirrors, and the space between them was silent. The sword cut through the heavens and the earth like a splash of ink, and the surging energy split the heavens and the earth in the foam of the blade. King Arthur came back to his senses and quickly raised the sword sheath in his hand. The sheath of the king's sword was not stained with blood, and an invisible barrier stood in front of King Arthur. Rumble! The black sword ray crushed down, impacting against the invisible barrier. The power was so great that it forced King Arthur to keep falling back in midair. King Arthur frowned, and suddenly he took the initiative to fall towards the sea below. Huh! Trying to dive to the bottom of the sea, or... King Arthur landed on the sea. He stood on the surface of the sea, and surprisingly, he did not fall into the water. The conch shell horn can suppress fluctuations in space and also make the water surface as still as a well. This is because he has formed an inherent barrier in this area. The water is as solid as the ground. He is a knight, fighting in the air, and his swordsmanship cannot be given the best conditions for display. King Arthur looked up at the sky, his eyes full of fighting spirit. At this moment, he was extremely excited, because this guy Zhang Yi, after being deprived of his space ability, had chosen to duel him like a knight with. Zhang Yi raised the corner of his mouth. As you wish. His way of fighting should also change. Zhang Yi swooped down with a huge divine refinement demon sword in his hand, and slashed down with the sword in his hand. Seeing this, Uncle Yu revealed a worried look. Close combat has always been Zhang Yi's weak point. Isn't this a bit dangerous? Zhou Qi heard this and smiled, closing her eyes as she said lightly, Uncle Yu, what you said is already in the past.